All right, everybody, what's good? Today, we're going to be objectively rating One Punch Man. Now, I know you're thinking, Zach, what are you talking about? Objectively rating a show? Are you crazy? There are only subjective ratings of shows. You can't just have an objective rating. That's just insane. And to that, I say fooey, kablooey. I have designed a format, a template within which you can objectively rate a show. So I'll explain to you what this template is, how it works, and then we'll get into the rating of One Punch Man. So to objectively rate an anime, we're going to have to break it down into 6 categories. And of course, there is going to be a little bit of bias. It's not always going to be 100% objective, okay? I mean, everything is subjective, all right? That's a completely different conversation. That's neither here nor there. Doesn't matter. All right. The first section is actually going to be plot execution. And what I mean by this is how well does the story play out logically? Does the story make logical sense? Does it follow a logical progression? Okay. Because if you have a story that's inconsistent, when you have things that don't really make sense, it kind of breaks the immersion. It takes you out of it. Okay. So basic storytelling ability. I think that's fair. The next one is going to be world building. How well is the world crafted? How well is the world communicated to the viewer, to the audience? Okay, so this is going to be the next objective rating. Okay, next is going to be character development. Now, character development is pretty obvious, but this is going to be probably the most in depth, and personally, this is the one that I care about the most. I love character development. World building is a close second, and then plot execution is a third for me personally. Okay, then we have animation. Okay, how well is it animated? Does it look good? Does it look like shit? If it's bad, does it have some kind of charm that makes up for it? Something like that. Like a really good example is any anime from like the 80s, 90s. It has a certain charm to it, right? Even though it's objectively worse than animation today, right? Then is going to be voice acting. Now, I am a sub watcher. I watch my anime in sub. I don't like the dubs for the most part because the voice acting is pretty bad. So I will be rating the voice acting in sub, which is like, it's crazy. How am I going to rate someone's voice acting in a different language? But I'm going to do it, okay? As long as nothing stands out, as long as nothing is like very glaringly obvious, it should be fine, right? Otherwise, I would just be nitpicking. Whoa, cat cameo. I'm not cutting that out. That was pretty fun, right? She didn't make it up. I had to. She probably needed a hand to get that. I didn't expect that. Anyway, anyway, the final category is actually going to be individuality. Okay, so how unique is the concept? How well is this concept presented to the audience? Okay, so without further ado, do people even say that anymore? Who's the last person that said that? I don't even know. Who says that? Who says without further ado anymore? Without further ado, my good sir, my good audience, let us commence the objective review of One Punch Man. So, first, we're actually going to start with plot execution. And here's the thing: One Punch Man executes the plot really, really well. At least I think so. It kind of revolves around a parody of the hero archetype, and it makes it mostly a comedy, right? Saitama's too strong, right? So everyone around him starts freaking out at everything that's going on. Everybody's freaking out like, oh my goodness, we're all gonna die. There's too much shit going on, or they're overconfident and everybody's taking everything way too seriously.
はい。高速接近反応。
And then, of course, the entire time, Saitama is just sitting there, casual as ever, waiting to jump in and defeat everything with one punch.
よろしく強いのだ。お前にしか倒せん。
Just absolutely knock everyone out, okay? And this is a rewarding formula. This is a rewarding story structure. It's very entertaining, it's very comedic, and this is kind of what I talked about in the last video I uploaded as well, is that's what makes the show interesting, is that formula, which revolves around Saitama and his character. So it was kind of like a two-in-one, making an observation on the plot while also making an analysis of Saitama's character. And speaking of Saitama's character, we don't see a lot of him by around the second season, and it kind of takes away from the original formula that they had established, and not too much, but enough that you notice, enough that it starts to get stale watching other heroes' stories and figuring out their lives, and it's just not as interesting as what Saitama is doing, but it kind of like tries to make it interesting in some way, and it doesn't really hit in the same way. And then, of course, season three is just, whew, okay, but we're going to get around to it. We're going to get around to all of it. Again, we're focusing on the logical progression of the story here and how the plot was actually executed, how they showed the story overall, right? And in that sense, it kind of dies down. It does get quite a bit stale, but there is that underlying interest that remains there. It's not hard to finish, it's not hard to keep watching season three for other reasons. Okay, but that's a different story, I suppose. That's a, again, we'll get into that later. But in terms of the story itself, it doesn't actually get more difficult to watch, right? But what is fascinating about this is that all of these characters actually reflect Saitama's story. They reflect what Saitama is going through. They reflect his philosophy in some way, shape, or form. And this actually serves as a really good way to move the plot forward. Because, like I said in my character analysis video, there is kind of like an underlying story that's happening. As the more that Saitama gets seen by everyone else around him, the more that he pushes his own philosophy of what it means to be a hero. And the more that people will start to adopt this mindset, the more that people will start to wake up. So everything that's going on around Saitama is actually a reflection of what he's going through. And there's a few different examples for this. One of the most obvious examples is Garo talking about the hero hierarchies.
曇ってるね。お前はこの俺が倒す。俺たちの存在価値を示すために。一番ランキングを気にしてるのはてめえじゃねえか。
Garo talks about the hero hierarchies around the same time that Saitama is telling Blizzard about the hero hierarchies. It's all in the second season, right? Where Saitama fights with Suryu, teaches him what it means to be a hero. Like that whole idea, that whole philosophy, all of the characters around Saitama in that season are reflecting that same knowledge, that same goal. So this actually increases the score of the plot execution because everything that's going on around them ties back into Saitama. And this is why the plot execution is so good overall. Okay? So that leaves us with the final score here. Okay, so for the final score for plot execution, it's going to get a 7.6, docking the story getting kind of stale in there, but overall, the way that everything ties in together is actually kind of fascinating. So it gets a 7.6. If you're more familiar with an S through F tier system, something like that, that's going to put it in middle B tier. 7.6 is going to be mid B tier. And you can think about it like S being 90 to 99, so on and so forth. You can do the rest yourself. Anyway, moving on. Next is going to be world building. For world building, this is actually going to tie a lot into another point that I made in the plot execution section, which is that a lot of the characters' stories reflect Saitama's own story. And the reason this is so important is because this is also happening in the world. You see this with like the Hero Association, with all of the other heroes. There's like a bunch of politics within the Hero Association, right? With the Monster Association, all of those things, they're all reflecting them taking things way too seriously and Saitama just being chill guy, he's going to go in and take care of everything in 2 seconds, right? So a lot of the world building does actually tie into that as well. At the same time, this kind of makes the world building feel a little bit stale and unfinished. I mean, overall, the show does a really good job of showing everybody the different heroes, how they interact with each other. They do a good job of showing the cities and the threat levels and the politics of the Hero Association. All of those things are fine. And the show does do a good job of doing that, right? But beyond that, it's just kind of like, what is even happening, right? There's a bunch of things that feel really random. Like, there are aliens that come out of nowhere, and that doesn't really get us anywhere at all. These aliens came down and invaded Earth. Saitama clears them, gets rid of them, and then they just move on. There was no other plot points with the aliens. They just came to get defeated, and they had nothing to do with the Monster Association at all. So that felt a little random, but that's not that big a deal. It does become more of a big deal when we're talking about the Hero Association and the Monster Association, who are important for both season 2 and season 3, and for the Hero Association, important from season 1. But somehow we know almost nothing about the Hero Association. There's like, and again, I understand it that it's supposed to be reflecting Saitama's personal story, but it kind of falls flat sometimes. Because out of nowhere, you have a board member's child getting kidnapped and taken away so they can force the Hero Association to act. And it's like, where did this even come from? And the Hero Association, they have the board of people that are all running the show, and they're all just kind of stupid. They're all just kind of dumb, and the show makes this really obvious, and it's supposed to be funny, um, but it just kind of it's missing something. We don't get a full explanation of what the Hero Association is, how it works, or anything like that. We get a basic explanation of the system and how the hierarchy works because that's what's important to Saitama in the moment.
ああ、だってまあ71点の C 級だしな。俺
But beyond that, nothing. And then the same thing with the Monster Association. All throughout season 3, you don't know anything about them. You just know that they're recruiting monsters from everywhere. And then Gyoro, the weird alien looking thing that has the psychic powers. I mean, he looks more like an alien than he does a monster.
ああ、素晴らしい。君は私の期待に応えてくれる。やっぱり。
To be honest, and they hint at like how monsters work, but they don't really explain it. And so apparently they can start out as humans and then become monsters, and they kind of hint at that throughout the show. They tell you this a little bit here and there, but overall, it feels like there's a huge plot point that's just missing in the explanation of this, and it feels like some of the story time would have been spent better in explaining that rather than us looking at heroes that we don't really care about, like a My Mask, who's mostly just kind of obnoxious. I mean, seriously.
How come you guys never include me? What's wrong with you?
So, because of all of this, the world building does get rated a little bit lower. It's still going to stay in the 7 range, but it's going to have to be 7.2 for the world building because, oh boy, it just really falls flat, to be honest. And honestly, as a quick side note, the way I'm describing it is rather harsh in comparison to the score. So it just goes to show I'm very generous with my scoring, and I always will be. But my words are going to be a little more direct. So it's always going to be that way. Anyway, on to the next thing, which is going to be the character development. Let me tell you, the character development is both really good and really bad at the same time. And I know you're thinking, Zach, what do you mean? And maybe you're not thinking that at all because you've actually picked up on what I've said already so far. And it's that everything that goes on in this story is a reflection of Saitama and what he's going through personally. But this kind of makes all of the other characters a little one dimensional. There isn't a lot of depth to the other characters in One Punch Man. Saitama has the most depth. I'm not saying there isn't any depth in any of the other characters in One Punch Man. King is a really good example. King has a lot of depth to him. Genos does have a little bit of depth, but not as much. They don't hint as much as they could. There is depth there, but we don't see the product of it as much. We when we could be. Like Sonic is a really good example of this actually. Sonic literally just wants to be better than Saitama and he's really fast and they all come from a secret ninja village. Actually, you know what? That kind of ties into world building too. I'm going to make another point about world building in the character development and relate them both together here right now, okay? What about this ninja village? You hear hints of the ninja village, you don't actually learn anything about it. You find out that Flashy Flash comes from this one of these ninja villages to like in the middle of the third season, near the end of the third season, and it's like, wait, what is happening, right? So it's so weird how that happens, and none of that is actually explained. It's like, why even hint at it in the first place, right? And Sonic is really all he wants to do is just be better than Saitama, and he's so obsessed with being faster and with being better. And all of the it's kind of weird because all of the ninja characters are kind of obsessed with speed. It's really strange in the first place, but this obsession is so one dimensional. Like Sonic doesn't care about anything else. He's just kind of creepy. And it's kind of funny how Saitama says he has an innocent smile too, but that's a different story.
嘘つけ。お前はただ自分の技を試したいだけだろ。その無邪気な笑顔見りゃわかるぜ。
And even though the entire show revolves around Saitama and all of these characters are reflections of Saitama, we end up not seeing as much of him in the first place. So, despite the character development being really good in terms of Saitama, because he is the focal point of the show, they really do make him the main character, right? Because a lot of other shows do this, but they add a little more depth to the other characters, and also One Punch Man tries to focus on too many characters at the same time. I do a little bit here and a little bit there, and it doesn't really pan out the way that I think that they imagined that it would, which is really unfortunate. But the point is that we end up not seeing as much of Saitama as we should for a show that very clearly revolves around him. Everything that happens is a reflection of what he is thinking and what he is doing. So the fact that we don't get to see as much of him in the second and third season is kind of disappointing. So you can kind of see how all of these flaws in these three categories are kind of connected. They're really interwoven together, and it's kind of unfortunate. But Saitama's character is still good. It's still funny. It still works with the story. So I'm going to have to give this one a 7.4. Character development is going to get a 7.4. All right? Next section is going to be animation. Now, of course, we're talking about animation, and this is going to be really disappointing, and you were all waiting for me to talk about the animation because nobody was really waiting for the animation was bad. It was bad. It was pretty good, and then it turned into just a visual novel, and it was really unfortunate. It kind of ruined a lot of the show, and the whole way that I planned on doing this, because I'm not an animator, I don't speak Japanese to be judging their voice acting, right? Because I only watch sub, really. I mean, not only, I will watch the dub sometimes. That's a completely different topic. I don't even know. I'm getting off the rails here. The point is that the animation kind of brought things down a lot. And I was able to finish the show, but I was questioning whether I should at that point because it genuinely was really disappointing to me that it wasn't as good as it could have been. The fights were really, really boring, and the fights are a lot of what make One Punch Man funny. And, the Garo fights are awesome. Like in season 2, the ending fight with the heroes and Garo was really cool. It was really well choreographed. It was really awesome. And so I think it made the switch to the visual novel style even more jarring than it already was in the first place. So that was really, really disappointing. And I was really upset about that. But the overall, okay, it's not the entire show. The animation in season 1 and season 2 was still really good. And it does bring it down, but this doesn't mean that we're going to be unfair in our judgment, in our rating here. So we're going to give it a 6.6. We're going to give the animation a 6.6. That's where we're going to be at, okay? So it's going to bring down the score a little bit, but not too much, okay? The next section is going to be voice acting, and there were no observable issues with the voice acting, and I suppose I haven't actually explained how the rating system is going to work. So right before we get to the last section, I'm going to explain how the rating system is going to work. I'm going to take a score, the score from each of these sections. I'm going to add them, and I'm just going to take the average out of those scores. And I think that's fair. And then I'm going to rate the show that way. That's how I'm going to rate all of these. So give each section a specific score, and then add them up, divide it by the number. You should know how to do. I'm pretty sure we all learned this in middle school. Okay, so I think that's fine. I think you get it. Anyway, um, but for the voice acting and for the animation, unless anything specific stands out, again, I'm not really going to rate them at very low. So it's just going to be kind of like a base plus point 0.1. Okay. If there were no observable issues, I'm going to do a base plus point 0.1, and I'm going to do an average of 5 scores, which just brings us to the last section. Okay. And that's going to be individuality. So, how unique is One Punch Man? Well, the hero archetype parody isn't anything that's entirely new, but the way that One Punch Man does it is rather entertaining. They find a really good way to mix the super overpowered main character with the superhero archetype and find a way to make it refreshing and entertaining and comedic. I think it does it well by having everyone around them, around Saitama, reflect this, lackadaisical nature. Is that even a word? I don't know. It's getting kind of late. I'm a little. Everyone else. The point is that everyone is so serious all the time, and Saitama just does not give a fuck at all. And this makes this archetype, this parody, the parody of the archetype, very entertaining. It makes it very funny to watch, and I think this actually makes One Punch Man stand out, especially because there is more of a story going on there. It kind of sucks that they don't focus on it as much as I would like them to personally, because I feel like it would make it more comedic if they were able to focus on the more serious aspects of it without taking away from Saitama, right? I don't, maybe I'm just being nitpicky at that point. I think I'm being a little bit nitpicky, but it's okay. Um, this brings me to the final score. The final score. In terms of individuality, One Punch Man is going to get a 7.8. Next, we're going to go over the final score. All right, so the final rating is 7.4. Let's see. One Punch Man is a really good show. I think it's a really good show. I really enjoyed it. But I also don't think it deserves above a B tier. I think that's around where it should go. I think 7.4 is a pretty fair score. It's not something that's going to change your life. It's something that, you can sit down to eat your dinner and put an episode on and have a good time and enjoy it. And there's nothing wrong with that, Not every anime is going to be an S tier anime. So, in terms of overall enjoyment, it's good. You know, I enjoyed watching One Punch Man. Now it's getting a little more subjective. It's getting a little more subjective here. But I think putting it in B tier is pretty fair. Anyway, so that's going to be it for this video. Thank you for watching if you made it to the end. Now, if you made it to the end, you should comment flute if you made it to the end. Why would you not comment flute if you made it to the end? I was going to ask why you would, but then I realized why wouldn't you, right? Because I'm asking you to. So here you go. Yeah, comment flute if you made it to the end. And thanks for watching. And also, between you and me, I love you.